We're going to start off by looking at some bone cells and how bone tissue is formed. So one thing to keep in mind, you're constantly making bone tissue and getting rid of old. Just like your skin and most other tissues in your body, it's a constant regeneration. So we're going to start with osteoprogenitor cells. These are the cells that do mitosis to make new cells. Remember last chapter you learned about skin and there was the stratum basale, and that's where you do mitosis to make new cells that then migrate to the top? It's kind of the same idea in your bones. The osteoprogenitor cells are the ones that do mitosis to make new bone cells. And they are mainly found in the periosteum and endosteum. So you should be familiar with these from reading the chapter already. These are the linings. So periosteum lines and covers the outside of the bone, and then you have a cavity inside the bone, and endosteum lines and covers that cavity on the inside of the bone. So this is where you have osteoprogenitor cells. So we'll put OP for osteoprogenitor cells. When they do mitosis, the new cells that they make are osteoblast. So this one is an osteoblast. These are the cells that are responsible for building new bone matrix. And sometimes I say bone matrix, sometimes I say bone tissue. I kind of use those terms interchangeably. And the way I remember this is I always think of blast, build. So these cells will migrate to a central canal. So you have an osteoblast is going to be formed out here, and it's going to migrate here. So these tunnels in the bone are called central canals. So this is a central canal. A central canal is all these tunnels in the bone that contain blood vessels and nerves. So if you've ever broken a bone, you know that it hurts really bad. Bones aren't just empty or dry. They're full of blood and nerves. The central canals are where you have blood vessels and nerves. So the osteoblast migrates to a central canal. So let's look at it a little up close here. Your osteoblast is going to be here, and it's going to be a group of them. They form a ring. And the reason they go to the central canal is they need access to the blood. So we're going to use OB to mean osteoblast. They're going to be by the central canal. And they're going to build bone tissue. Remember in chapter 2, we talked about you are what you eat? Well, in order to build bone tissue, they have to get nutrients from the blood. So that's why they go to the central canal. And building bone tissue occurs in 2 steps. And if you remember from your pre-class assignment from reading, there's 2 components to bone matrix. There's the osteoid and the hydroxyapatite, the organic part and inorganic part. So that's the 2 steps of building bone tissue. So step 1 is to make the osteoid. So osteoid is the organic part of bone. And don't think about like grocery store organic, like if you go buy organic apples or something. In science class, organic has a different meaning. Organic molecules are the protein, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. If a molecule is organic, it means it's one of those 4 types of molecules and it's made by a living cell. So in this case, we're going to make proteins, and they are made by the osteoblast. So that's what makes it organic. And this protein is mostly collagen. Just like in your skin, the dermis of your skin is mostly collagen, the osteoid of bone is mostly collagen. And collagen, the feature it adds to the bone is that it's slightly flexible. If you think about a tall building like the skyscrapers in the cities, on a windy day, those buildings will sway in the wind. If you've ever been up in the top of one of those buildings on a windy day, you can feel it swaying. They do that on purpose. They design the buildings to sway. If they didn't sway, they would snap. Your bones, although they are, firm, they do have a little bit of flexibility to them. And that little bit of flexibility helps prevent them from breaking. So this makes your bones slightly flexible. It's not much, but they do have a little bit of flexibility. And this slight flexibility prevents breaks. They would snap under the stress if they couldn't bend a little. So you have, let's draw this, what's going on. You have an osteoblast. So here's an osteoblast. It makes the collagen and then it secretes it. So you get this collagen like this. It makes and secretes the osteoid. So you have kind of a framework. Think of this like the 2x4s in the wall. So the osteoid is a framework. Then next is the hydroxyapatite. This is the inorganic part of bone. So inorganic is anything that is not made by a living cell and it's not a protein, carbohydrate, lipid, or nucleic acid. So it's pretty much everything else. And in this case, it's going to be calcium and phosphorus. So calcium and phosphorus are in rocks and soil. And then plants take them up with their roots, then they're in the plants. Animals eat the plants, then they're in the animal. And then when the animal dies and decomposes, they go back to being in the soil. So that's what an inorganic molecule. It doesn't change the whole time, whether it's in a rock, whether it's in a plant, whether it's in an animal, it's still calcium. It's not being made or destroyed. It's just there being cycled through the food web. So that's inorganic. So the calcium and phosphorus from the blood are going to combine and form hydroxyapatite. And this then coats that osteoid framework. Think about if you're building a house and you put up the 2x4s, that's the osteoid, then you put drywall on it. Drywall is the hydroxyapatite. So then you get like this. The hydroxyapatite coats that framework and it fills in so that then you get your solid bone matrix. And this calcium and phosphorus are very hard. So this is what makes the bones hard. And that is called compressional strength. So you can stand up, you can bear weight, you can put all your weight on your bones and they can handle it because they have this compressional strength. So the whole idea of being by the blood is because osteoid is protein. We know that protein is made of amino acids. So if this cell is going to make protein, it has to get amino acids from your blood. And remember, the way the amino acids got in your blood was that you ate protein and digested it. And then if you're going to coat this in calcium and phosphorus, those also have to come from the blood. So forming new bone tissue occurs by the central canal because that's where you have access to the blood to get the nutrients. So then we have this new tissue formed. So this fills in with our new bone matrix we just made. And notice that the cell surrounds itself with matrix. So once a cell has surrounded itself with matrix, it converts to our next type of cell here, which is an osteocyte. This is a mature bone cell. Every osteocyte used to be an osteoblast. So this used to be an osteoblast, but it finished building matrix and it surrounded itself. So it trapped itself in its own matrix that it built. And once it becomes trapped in this own matrix, that's when it converts from an osteoblast to an osteocyte. So you can kind of think of like osteoblast as a working bone cell and osteocyte as a retired bone cell. So the osteoblast is getting up, going to work every day, making bone tissue. Finally, it gets done, it retires, and then it's an osteocyte where it can just sit in the recliner and watch Wheel of Fortune all day. But really, the job of an osteocyte is that it monitors the stress on bones. And we're going to talk more about that later, about stress on bones, but that's what they do. They're monitoring how much stress you subject your bones to. So down here, all of these are your osteocytes. So they used to be osteoblast. So this is a continual, ongoing process. So you always have the new generation here by the central canal. They build bone tissue, then they convert into osteocytes and they monitor stress. Then another new generation is going to come in. So every time that happens, they get pushed further out. So here on the edge, this is your oldest. So you're always making new tissue by the central canal, and then it gets pushed out so that the oldest tissue is on the edge. You can notice also that it has these distinct rings. You can see each generation, right? Kind of like the rings in a tree. So each generation forms a distinct ring, and these rings are called concentric lamellae. So that is each ring. Another feature is that through the concentric lamellae, you have little tunnels called caniculus. So you can kind of see here all these little extensions like this. You have tunnels that connect these. So like these two are connected to each other by a tunnel, right? They're connected to their neighbors by tunnels. This allows them to pass nutrients and waste back and forth. So the blood, remember, is there at the central canal. And osteocytes are living cells. They need nutrients. They produce waste. But the ones out here at the edge have no access to the blood. So they have these tunnels that connect them, and that is what allows them to pass stuff back and forth. So the ones that are by the blood will get nutrients, and then they'll pass it through the tunnels to the ones out here further from the blood. And then waste gets passed forward to the blood. And one more word to go here is lacuna. Always makes me think of Lion King when I say that word. But this is the little hollow spot where each osteocyte lives. So if you look back here in our picture, here's our osteoblast, and it built this matrix to surround itself, but it leaves itself a little cave here where it lives. So the lacuna is kind of the little cave where the osteocyte lives. So you have an osteoblast formed from an osteoprogenitor cell. It migrates out to a central canal. So you can think of like the osteoprogenitor cells are the parents, right? So your parents give birth to you, they raise you, then you go out in the world to make your way. So that's the osteoblast. They're like 18 years old or 20 years old, and they're going out in the world to make their way and get a job and have a career. So that's what they're doing. They're the working ones. They're building bone tissue. Then they retire and become osteocytes. And as each new generation moves in, they get pushed out toward the edge. And this whole group, I'm sorry, there's one more word. This whole structure that you see here is an osteon. So an osteon is the central canal and the lamellae that surround it. And then if you look at this picture of the bone, so like for example right here, there's an osteon. There's an osteon. So you can kind of think of osteons as neighborhoods. So compact bone is composed of all these series of osteons. So this picture is just kind of putting that all together, the organization. So just kind of a summary. So here, for example, you can see here is an osteocyte. And you can see the little cave where it lives is the lacuna. These tunnels are the canicula. You can see here would be the new generation of osteoblast that are building bone tissue. Out here would be the oldest, and each ring is a lamellae. And you get groups called osteons. So there's the organization of bone. And one thing to keep in mind, what we'll talk about next, is what happens to the old tissue. If you're constantly making new tissue and pushing the old out to the edge, if you just kept doing that, your bones would just keep getting bigger and bigger. But they're not. So you do have another cell that we're going to talk about called an osteoclast that dissolves that old tissue from the edges.